How did Cormac McCarthy feel about short stories? And why did he only write two during his entire career? Well, today we are going to hear from Cormac McCarthy himself and his alternative opinions on short stories. Because just the other day, I was telling you guys that you should follow Ray Bradbury's advice if you are a new or beginning writer and write a short story every single week. Because by the end of the year, you will have 52 stories and a couple of them won't suck and they will be publishable. But of course, McCarthy took a different path because in the late 1950s, when McCarthy returned to Tennessee from the Air Force and enrolled in the University of Tennessee for the second time, he wanted to become a writer. And next week on the channel, when I start to release details about McCarthy's personal life that have never been revealed before, you guys will see that he did not like the Air Force, he did not like college, but he wanted to be a writer really bad. And in the late 1950s, that's before really the invention of the MFA program, at every single college to take young writers' money and make them think that they'll become good. But McCarthy decides during these first couple years to write two short stories, A Wake for Susan and A Drowning Incident. But after that, he never writes any again. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. I have a playlist down below that has over 150 videos on McCarthy, so go check those out when you are done with this video. And let us now hear from McCarthy on short stories because it will give context to the rest of my analysis. I'm not interested in writing short stories. Anything that doesn't take years of your life and drive you to suicide hardly seems worth doing. And of course, this is kind of melodramatic. This is sad boy McCarthy coming out, cancer McCarthy. But he stood by this for his entire career. And I think McCarthy realized in his short stories that he didn't have the space. And that may seem simple, but there are some authors who can work within constraints better than kind of these wide open spaces. And there are some like Wallace or Murakami who can seamlessly, or Stephen King, who they can move between short fiction and long fiction pretty well. But at the start of his career, McCarthy was engaging in what a lot of us new writers start with, which is autobiographical stuff. And what's funny about his first two short stories, A Wake for Susan and A Drowning Incident, is that they actually feature semicolons and interiority, which we never find in any of his later novels. I think there are one or two semicolons in The Orchard Keeper, but beyond that, they are non-existent. But what's beautiful about A Drowning Incident in retrospect is that it was the start of McCarthy starting to work through his father trauma because he had a lot of it, as we all do. But he was working obviously on a grander artistic scale with that trauma. And this is where I think he first realized how big of a problem it was because he did move back home. He was back in Knoxville. He spent all this time in his Air Force. By this time, his brother had graduated and was in law school. His sisters were already in successful families or having successful careers. And here is Cormac, the middle child, saying that he wants to become a writer. And so A Drowning Incident is about a boy whose family has these puppies, or somehow they come across these puppies, and the dad doesn't want them anymore, and the boy loves them, but the dad brings them out to the river in a cage and drowns them. Does this sound familiar? Oh yeah, Judge Holden. Oh, something very similar happens in The Orchard Keeper, Outer Dark, and actually in Suttree. So the threads of The Drowning Incident go on forever. But the dad drowns these puppies, and the boy feels spiteful about this at a very deep level. And so the boy has a younger sibling, a toddler. And so when the dad comes home from work, he takes one of the dead puppies and places it in the crib with the toddler to kind of show this weird animistic idea that this is important, that this was just a baby too, that this life matters also. Puppies' lives matter. But this was a strong rebuke against his father, which would continue, honestly, until his last books. The Passenger and Stella Maris, at their core, are about the sins of the father. I'm about to make a video soon about how Blood Meridian is a novel about father trauma. And McCarthy was so successful with these short stories that he actually got a couple thousand dollars in today's money from a contest at his university. And I think this gave McCarthy the push he needed to think that he was going to be a great novelist. But looking back to his quote and looking back to you, because I want to speak to you guys now, I am somewhat split on this opinion if you should jump straight into novels, because there is a big difference between most people and Cormac McCarthy. I hate to say it, but if you guys have never read The Orchard Keeper, or if you've tried and you didn't like it, I do have a 10-hour course on The Orchard Keeper in the Right Conscious Substack if you have trouble getting through it and want to understand it. But from one, from paragraph one in that novel, McCarthy is writing on fire. He is writing in that manner that we all love. And he's in his 20s at this point. He is 2 or 3 years into his writing career, and he is actually writing more aggressively than he does for the rest of his career. McCarthy's prose in The Orchard Keeper is more animated, falls more into cliche or a commonality than a lot of his other novels, which is great at times. You kind of get to see deeper into his own consciousness because he's not really holding back. And his descriptions are a little bit more piercing because eventually with Outer Dark and his other novels that add more supernatural characters, he kind of learned that process I've talked about before where he starts adding it all at the end. That didn't seem to happen with The Orchard Keeper. He came into that novel with way too much and they were cutting. They were trying to pull it together and figure it out. They weren't necessarily adding stuff. But I want you to check out some of the sentences in The Orchard Keeper. Like maybe read it, look through it, and ask yourself, am I at this level yet? Can I write sentences this beautiful? And for most people, it is a no. You may have been writing for 10 or 20 years, but the prodigal McCarthy is better than you and better than me. And so that's something to kind of take in account here, that McCarthy is that star athlete that shows up on day one and is good. I remember my junior year of cross country, this guy showed up and I had been training. I think my sophomore year, I ran like a 16:15 5K and I was so pumped. I was like, man, I'm going to be the best on the team this year. I've trained so hard. And some random guy that had never run in his life shows up and just through pure natural talent alone, that year he ran like a 15:25K. And I obviously got faster, but I wasn't as fast as him. And then suddenly he was the leader and number one guy on the team. And hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But McCarthy worked hard. McCarthy dedicated himself to poverty and a lot of these different things. But returning to the quote, McCarthy says, anything that doesn't take years of your life and drive you to suicide hardly seems worth doing. And I think that is kind of the new model that I'm starting to promote for writers out there, that if you don't do something that changes your life immensely and is going to transform the lives of others, then you probably shouldn't be releasing it as a premium product, as a paid product. I do think that a lot of writers miss opportunities to release a lot of their stuff on Substack or other things for free, even novels, just giving them away for free and building an email list and gaining an audience and all these different things. Because if you did that challenge I just told you about, where you wrote a short story every single week for a year and promoted it, even just a couple hours a week, just spent some time on Instagram or doing whatever, you would have an email list of a couple hundred people. You would have some fans. If you barely did anything, if you did a lot, it may be way bigger than that. And then obviously you would be a much better writer at the end of that. But when you put a price tag on something and it comes in a physical book format, then you are saying something about it. You are saying this, I want your full attention. I want your time. If I posted something on Substack, I understand that most people are going to kind of scan it. That's how people do blog posts. But we don't want anyone scanning our novel that we worked on for 5 or 6 years. And McCarthy's point about suicide also kind of gets away a lot of the people who are doing this for the wrong reasons. Because at some point, I personally realized that writing maybe wasn't going to be the strongest medium of communication for me for my entire life. And that if I continued doing that, I wouldn't be able to reach as many people as I could if I cultivated some of my speaking talents or lack of talents. And that slowed down a lot of my writing progress because when I was totally focused on writing, I was in that mentality that this project needs to consume me. And that's something I've been working on over the past year or two, is kind of managing being a teacher, having a family, being a speaker and teacher here on YouTube, and then being a writer and trying to kind of find that weird passion and intensity around projects. And what that's looked like for me is mostly cutting out fiction and just solely focusing on poetry, because juggling fiction and poetry was just making it feel like I was just checking, boxes for completing a novel and doing these things. But eventually I'll have more time when I don't have to work or like during summers when I'm not teaching to kind of dial down into fiction or some other medium of writing and get to this point where it feels like I want to commit suicide. Because even the 2 novels I published under pen names that were just practice novels that I said, I want to complete something. I want to just release something to the world just because I heard that releasing something, even if nobody knows about it, makes you better. Those drove me absolutely crazy. At one point, I was dreaming about writing. Like, I would wake up and I'd be like writing in my dreams. I'd be writing books and like scenes. And I would wake up and be like, oh my God, I have to do this. and my life was in shambles because of a past relationship. And like, that's how I want to feel about everything. I even want to feel that way about this channel. That's why I always say I want to do 10 videos a day. I want to dedicate myself to this so much that I'm like, my wife's going to have to drag me away from like, cause I'm sleeping on the microphone every single night. This is how you get good. You have to be passionate. You have to have intensity. You have to come at this because we are the vanguard. Most of the books getting published today are shit. Most of what we're writing is shit, but it actually has the potential, if we put enough time in and maybe get together with each other and help each other out, to create something beautiful. And so I don't feel like that suicidal tendency comes from short stories very much. And maybe that shouldn't be the marker of what we should be judging things on. But if you take building sentences seriously, if you get people to read your stuff, if you get an editor or like learn to copy edit yourself, then I think jumping straight into novels after a very quick short story saga of your writing career would probably be a good idea, because there have been some short stories that have changed my life that have been very impactful on me. And I've read thousands. That's what happens when you work at literary journals. But there have been plenty more novels that have changed my life. And it's just a length thing. So get out there, get writing, and I can't wait to see your book on my shelf one day.